Hey everyone, and welcome back to Forbidden Unveiled. I'm John Doe, your host, and I am so excited for today's deep dive.
Ooh, sounds exciting.
It is because we're heading to a place where history meets hauntings, a place that inspired one of the most iconic horror stories of all time.
Okay, I'm intrigued already.
It's the Stanley Hotel.
Oh, wow, the Stanley Hotel. For a place that's inspired so much fear, the Stanley has a surprisingly charming history.
Yeah,
It's a story of ambition, innovation, and a touch of tragedy, all set against the backdrop of the breathtaking Rocky
it's
Mountains.
like a real-life ghost story just waiting to be told.
It really is.
And to help us unpack all the spooky details, I've got our resident paranormal expert, Jane Doe, back with us.
Hey, everyone, thanks for having me back.
Always a pleasure to have you on, Jane.
I always love a good ghost story, and the Stanley has enough to fill a whole library.
Right?
Yeah.
So for our listeners who might not be familiar, let's start with the basics. What exactly is the Stanley Hotel and why is it so famous?
Ooh, okay, well, picture this. It's the early 1900s, and Freeland Oscar Stanley, the inventor of the Stanley steamer automobile, is diagnosed with tuberculosis.
Wow.
Doctors tell him to head west for the fresh air, and he ends up in the beautiful valley of Estes Park, Colorado.
So the guy who invented one of the first cars goes west to cure his tuberculosis and ends up building a luxurious hotel.
Right.
That's quite a story.
It is a very American story, I would say, and there's a bit of irony there, too.
Oh,
Stanley, the man known for his steam-powered vehicles, almost died from gasoline fumes while overseeing the construction of the hotel.
okay, that's kind of eerie, right? Like foreshadowing the hotel's future connection to the strange and unexplained.
Right.
Hmm.
Yeah, maybe a little bit of foreshadowing there, but that wasn't the only strange event during construction.
Oh, really?
In 1911, a massive gas explosion rocked the hotel, causing significant damage.
Whoa, a real explosion. That's not just some spooky legend.
Nope, it's a historical fact.
Wow.
The explosion happened right below room
Oh,
217,
no.
and it's considered one of the key events that might have kicked off the hotel's paranormal activity.
Room 217. Now, that's a room with a reputation. Everyone who knows anything about the Stanley has heard about room 217.
It's the most famous room in the hotel.
Yeah, and speaking of reputations, Jane, we have to talk about the hotel's most famous guest, Stephen King.
Ah, yes, Stephen King. He stayed in room 217 back in 1974, and let's just say it wasn't exactly a restful stay.
So the story goes he had this terrifying nightmare about a fire hose chasing his son down the hallway. He woke up in a cold sweat, lit a cigarette, and bam, the inspiration for The Shining hit him.
And the rest, as they say, is horror history.
It is.
King's novel and the subsequent film adaptation by Stanley Kubrick cemented the Stanley Hotel's place in pop culture and fueled its reputation as a paranormal hotspot.
Okay, so we've got a hotel built by a famous inventor, a near-fatal gasoline incident, a massive gas explosion, and Stephen King having nightmares that inspired a classic horror novel. Is it just me, or is the Stanley starting to sound like the perfect setting for a ghost story?
It definitely has all the ingredients.
Right.
But let's not jump ahead too far.
Okay.
Before we get into the specifics of the hauntings, I think it's important to understand the history of the people who lived and worked at the Stanley.
Yeah.
Because those stories, those lives, are what give the hauntings their context and their weight.
That's a great point. I mean, it's easy to get caught up in the spooky tales, but the Stanley was a real place with real people who had real experiences.
Absolutely.
And sometimes those experiences can be even more unsettling than any ghost story.
Exactly. So let's start with the woman who's become almost synonymous with Room 217, Elizabeth Wilson, the head chambermaid.
Okay, Elizabeth Wilson, she was the one who was injured in that gas explosion, right? But she survived and kept working at the hotel. That's dedication.
It is, and her story is central to the lore of Room 217. Guests have reported all sorts of strange things happening in that room. Lights, flickering luggage, unpacking itself, and the feeling of someone watching them.
Wait, luggage unpacking itself? That's either a really helpful ghost or a really nosy one.
Right.
Haha.
And here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
Some people believe that Elizabeth's spirit is still tidying up Room 217, folding clothes, and making beds just like she did when she was alive.
So it's not all spectral scares. Some of the Stanley's ghosts might actually be helpful. I
Yeah.
like the sound of that.
Right. There's even a theory that Elizabeth might be enforcing her old-fashioned morals, making unmarried couples feel unwelcome in Room 217.
Interesting.
It's like she's still the head chambermaid even in the afterlife.
Wow, talk about taking your job seriously. Okay, so we've got Elizabeth Wilson, the ever-diligent chambermaid, potentially haunting room 217. But the Stanley's a big place. Surely there are other spirits lurking about, right?
Oh, absolutely. And to understand their stories, we need to move beyond Room 217 and explore other parts of the hotel places that are just as steeped in history and just as likely to be haunted.
Like where I'm ready for more spooky details.
Well, for starters, there's the concert hall. It was built by F.O. Stanley for his wife Flora, a talented pianist, and it's said to be one of the most active spots for paranormal activity in the entire hotel.
A concert hall. So we're talking fandom music and ghostly applause. That's a concert I wouldn't mind attending.
You might be surprised by who you encounter there.
Oh,
There's the story of Lucy, a woman who reportedly lived in the concert hall when the hotel was struggling financially.
okay.
She's said to manipulate flashlights and even appear in reflections still drawn to the place she called home.
It's kind of sad, really. Like she's trying to hold on to a piece of the past, even in death.
Yeah, and then there are Paul and Edward, two handymen who worked at the hotel and are said to still be working there even in the afterlife.
Okay.
Edward is known for causing unexplained noises and bangs, while Paul seems to enforce his old curfew, making sure things quiet down after 11 p.m.
So it's a ghostly maintenance crew.
Right.
That actually explains a lot of the unexplained noises you hear about at the Stanley.
It does, and of course we can't forget about F.O. and Flora Stanley
Sure.
themselves. They're said to still be very much present in the hotel they created, with Flora playing her beloved piano and F.O. appearing in reflections, and even, oddly enough, in an American flag gifted to the hotel.
Wait, his face in an American flag? Okay, that's just weird.
It is.
Okay.
And then there are the phantom party sounds of revelry and laughter echoing through the halls late at night. It's as if the Stanleys are still hosting their grand soirees, even in the afterlife.
So it's not all doom and gloom in the afterlife. Some of these ghosts seem to be having a pretty good time. But, we've talked a lot about the ghosts of the Stanley, but what about the hotel itself? I mean, this place is a historical landmark.
It is, and we haven't even touched on the stories and legends surrounding the fourth floor.
Oh,
A place known for children's laughter, unsettling touches, and the presence of some truly fascinating and perhaps infamous spirits.
okay, now I'm really intrigued. Children's laughter in a haunted hotel. That's enough to send shivers down anyone's spine.
Yeah, it's a little creepy.
It is.
But before we head up to the fourth floor, I think we need to take a closer look at the Stanley itself, its architecture, its history, and its place in the cultural landscape. Because understanding the building itself will give us a deeper appreciation for the stories that unfold within its walls.
That makes sense. It's like setting the stage for the ultimate ghost story.
Exactly. So when we come back, we'll be trading ghost stories for architectural blueprints and historical records. But don't worry, we'll still keep an eye out for any spectral photobombers lurking in the background.
Sounds like a plan. We'll be right back after a quick break.
Welcome back to Forbidden Unveiled. Before the break, we were getting ready to explore the Stanley Hotel from a different perspective, moving beyond ghost stories and into the realm of history and architecture.
Jane, when you think about a haunted hotel, you don't usually picture architectural brilliance, but the Stanley is a truly stunning building.
Absolutely, John, and it's a prime example of colonial revival architecture.
Okay.
Picture a stately, symmetrical building with a grand entrance, white columns, and those classic dormer windows.
So it's got that classic historical look, kind of like a grand old mansion.
Exactly. Colonial revival was all the rage in the early 20th century.
Right.
It was meant to evoke a sense of history, elegance, and timeless beauty.
And the Stanley definitely have that timeless feel. It's like stepping back into another era.
And F.O. Stanley spared no expense when it came to creating a luxurious experience for his guests. The Stanley was actually one of the first hotels in the country to be fully electrified.
Wow, electric lights and telephones in every room back in the early 1900s. That's pretty impressive.
It was a sign of luxury and innovation, and that attention to detail is evident throughout the hotel. The rooms are spacious, with high ceilings, ornate fireplaces, and those incredible views of the Rocky Mountains.
Now that you mention it, I can see how the architecture itself could contribute to the hotel's spooky reputation. Those long hallways, the grand staircases, the shadows cast by the fireplaces. It all sets a pretty dramatic scene.
You're absolutely right. The architecture creates a sense of grandeur, but also a sense of isolation, especially if you imagine wandering those hallways alone at night.
Okay, you're starting to creep me out now. But, for all its grandeur, the Stanley also has a kind of unsettling emptiness about it, especially in The Shining.
That's a great observation, and that feeling of emptiness, of isolation, was something Stephen King definitely tapped into. Remember, he stayed at the Stanley during the off-season when it was practically deserted. He and his wife were the only guests.
Can you imagine wandering those empty hallways, hearing the wind howling outside? It's like a recipe for a nightmare.
No wonder he had that terrifying dream about the fire rose. But, the parallels between The Shining and the Stanley go beyond just the atmosphere.
Oh, yeah? Like what?
Well, think about the boiler room in The Shining. It's a place of intense heat pressure and potential danger.
And in the real Stanley, the boiler room was where that gas explosion happened.
Exactly. It's almost like the hotel itself was whispering a story to Stephen King, using its own history to inspire his fiction.
That's chilling. So the hotel isn't just a setting for a scary story. It's practically a character in the story.
I think that's a great way to put it. But let's move beyond The Shining for a moment. The Stanley has a rich history that extends far beyond its connection to Stephen King.
You're right. I mean, this place has been around for over a century. It must have seen its fair share of history.
It has. The Stanley has hosted presidents, celebrities, and even royalty.
Wow.
It's been a social hub, a place for gatherings, celebrations, and even political intrigue.
So it's not just a haunted hotel, it's a time capsule of history.
And that history is interwoven with the stories of the people who lived and worked there. We've talked about Elizabeth Wilson and the other spirits, but there are countless others whose lives touched the Stanley and whose stories might still linger within its walls.
It's amazing to think about all the lives that have passed through those doors, all the laughter, the tears, the joys, and the sorrows. It's like the hotel itself has absorbed all those emotions, all that energy.
And that energy might be what some people perceive as paranormal activity. It's the echoes of the past, the residue of human experience manifesting in ways we can't fully explain.
I've got chills. But, we've explored the history, the architecture, the connections to The Shining, but what about the people who live in Estes Park today? What do they think about having a world-famous haunted hotel in their backyard?
That's a great question, and I think it's a mixed bag for some. The Stanley is a source of pride and a major tourist attraction that brings in revenue and jobs.
But for others, it's a constant reminder of the town's spooky reputation.
Yeah, I think so. And they might be a little tired of all the ghost hunters and paranormal investigators.
So it's kind of like a love-hate relationship. The locals might be tired of the ghost hunters, but they appreciate what the Stanley brings to the town.
I think that's a fair assessment, but for others, the Stanley is simply a part of their everyday lives. They might work there, they might have attended events there, they might even have their own ghost stories to tell.
It's easy to forget that for the people of Estes Park, the Stanley isn't just a haunted hotel, it's a landmark, a community center, and a part of their history.
Exactly, and their perspective reminds us that there's more to the Stanley than just spooky tales and paranormal investigations.
Yeah.
It's a place with a rich and complex history, a place where the past and present collide in fascinating ways.
Well, Jane, I have to say, after this deep dive, I'm looking at the Stanley Hotel in a whole new light. It's not just a haunted hotel, it's a testament to human ingenuity, a historical treasure, and a cultural icon.
And it's a reminder that the line between fact and fiction can be blurry, especially when it comes to a place as steeped in stories as the Stanley. But that's what makes it so fascinating, isn't it?
Absolutely. And speaking of fascinating, we still have one more floor to explore. Remember that fourth floor we mentioned, the one with the children's laughter and the unsettling touches?
Oh, yes, the fourth floor is a whole other chapter in the Stanley's haunted history. And it's home to some truly intriguing spirits, including a former earl and a notorious outlaw.
Okay, now you've really piqued my curiosity. An earl and an outlaw, this just keeps getting better and better. So when we come back, we're heading up to the fourth floor where the stories are just as chilling as the mountain air. Stay with us. Welcome back to Forbidden Unveil. We're wrapping up our deep dive into the Stanley Hotel, and I'm feeling a little like I've just checked in myself.
I know what you mean, John. We've gone from car inventors to gas explosions, from Stephen King's nightmares to phantom piano music, and now we're heading up to the fourth floor, which is apparently a whole other level of haunted.
So, Jane, what's the deal with the fourth floor? What makes it so different from the rest of the hotel?
Well, John, the fourth floor seems to be a magnet for a certain type of spirit, the restless, the mischievous, and perhaps even the malevolent.
Okay, now that's creepy. So who are these spirits?
Well, one of the most well-known is Lord Dunraven. He was an earl who owned the land where the Stanley Hotel now stands before M.O. Stanley came along.
So this Lord Dunraven, he's like the OG owner, the original landlord. But why would he be haunting the Stanley?
There are a few theories. Some say he's upset that his land was sold and he's still trying to assert his claim even from beyond the grave. Others say he had a contentious relationship with the locals and he's still stirring up trouble.
A spectral real estate dispute. That's a new one.
And his alleged hauntings are pretty unsettling. Guests in room 407, where he's said to reside, have reported lights flickering, the feeling of being watched, and even having their hair pulled.
So it's not all phantom parties and helpful chambermaids at the Stanley. Some of these ghosts sound a bit more menacing.
That's the thing about the paranormal, John. It's not always predictable, and the fourth floor seems to attract a certain type of energy.
Like a gathering place for the more mischievous spirits?
Maybe. And speaking of mischievous, there's another spirit on the fourth floor who has a reputation for causing trouble, Jim Rocky Mountain Nugent.
Rocky Mountain Nugent. That's a name that sounds like it belongs in a Wild West novel.
He was a real-life mountain man trapper, and yes, outlaw. He was known for his rugged lifestyle, his clashes with the law, and his tragic death in a shootout.
A real-life outlaw haunting the Stanley. I bet he's got some stories to tell.
He's said to haunt room 428, where guests have reported feeling a strong, almost oppressive presence.
So we've got a disgruntled earl and a Wild West outlaw roaming the fourth floor. What's the vibe like up there? Is it just a constant barrage of spectral shenanigans?
It's more nuanced than that. Along with the more unsettling reports, the fourth floor is also known for the sound of children's laughter, even when there are no children staying on the floor.
Okay, that's just creepy children's laughter in a haunted hotel. It's like something straight out of a horror movie. But who are these spectral children?
That's a bit of a mystery. There's no historical record of any children dying at the Stanley. Some people believe they're the spirits of children who might have visited the hotel over the years, their energy somehow lingering behind.
So, like, the hotel itself is a magnet for energy, good or bad.
Perhaps, and the fourth floor seems to be particularly sensitive to that energy.
You know, as we've been talking about all these different spirits, from Elizabeth Wilson to Lord Dunraven to Rocky Mountain Jim, it's striking to me how diverse the Stanley spectral residents seem to be.
It's a real mix, isn't it? You've got the helpful chambermaid, the mischievous handyman, the disgruntled Earl the outlaw, and then these mysterious children.
It's almost like the Stanley is a reflection of the history of the West itself. You've got the pioneers, the entrepreneurs, the outlaws, the everyday people trying to make a living, and they're all somehow still present in this one place.
I think that's a beautiful way to put it, John, and it speaks to the power of place. The way a building can become a repository for stories and energies, a living testament to the people who have passed through its doors.
So after this deep dive, I have to ask Jane, what are your thoughts on the Stanley Hotel? Do you believe it's truly haunted?
You know, John, I go into every investigation with an open mind and a healthy dose of skepticism, and the Stanley is a place that definitely challenges your beliefs.
What do you mean?
There's something about the Stanley that's hard to deny: the history, the stories, the sheer number of reports from people who have experienced something unexplainable. It's a place that makes you question what you think you know about the world, about the nature of reality itself.
So you're saying you felt it too, that something more is going on at the Stanley?
I've definitely felt a presence there, an energy that's hard to describe. But whether that's the presence of spirits, or simply the weight of history, or maybe even just our own imaginations running wild, I can't say for sure, and I think that's part of the allure of the Stanley, the mystery, the unknown.
Well, into this deep dive, I'm definitely adding a visit to the Stanley to my bucket list, but maybe I'll bring a nightlight just in case.
That might be a good idea, John. But even if you don't see a ghost, I guarantee you'll experience something special at the Stanley. It's a place that stays with you long after you leave.
Well, listeners, we've reached the end of our deep dive into the Stanley Hotel. We've explored its history, its architecture, its hauntings, and its enduring legacy.
And we've learned that sometimes the most fascinating stories are those that leave us with more questions than answers.
So what do you think? Is the Stanley Hotel truly haunted? Share your thoughts with us on social media, and be sure to subscribe to Forbidden Unveiled for more deep dives into the strange, the mysterious, and the unexplained.
Thanks for joining us, everyone.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep your eyes peeled for the unusual. You never know what you might find lurking just around the corner.